All right.
Yes.
Okay. So today's demo is going to be all about spruing your waxes. So we have, I'll just kind of go through the materials on the table. We have the flask base, okay? What size flask you choose will be determined by the size of the thing that you're going to cast. And certainly if you're doing multiples, you'll want to maybe choose a larger flask. This is the smallest flask that we have. And the general thought is that if you've got your ring mounted on your sprues, here's the flask base. You want about 1 inch around the sides of your piece between your wax and the flask wall, and then at least 1 inch above the highest point of your wax before the ceiling of the flask. Okay, so if I put my little alien astronaut, this is a piece that a student of mine years ago made, and I love it so much, and they allowed me to have one of their wax castings to cast in bronze, so maybe that'll finally happen this semester. So if I'm looking inside, I have about 1 inch of clearance all the way around, minus the little backpack, so that's a little bit close. That's more like 3/4 of an inch between the backpack and the flask wall, but that should be okay. But you just don't want something that's very, like, you don't want anything that's like 1/4 of an inch from the edge to the flask wall or anything like that, because that may not be enough investment to have a successful casting. Like, the metal can actually break through if you don't have enough of a buffer around the whole thing. So that's how you will determine what size flask you need. Just, measure your piece, measure the diameter of the flask, and just kind of do a little bit of internal math to figure out if it's going to sit comfortably and give you enough buffer room all the way around. This is what a flask looks like. There's only one in the bin down there. All of them live under the bench in the labeled boxes. There's only one that does not have holes. It's still fine to use. It's just a different kind of flask. And the holes might be a very curious thing, and you're wondering why. It makes the whole process easier of, like, when we plunge your molds after we've cast in the metal, it's just easier to wash the investment out with all the little holes.
And the investment won't flow out?
This is where the tape comes in. Yeah. So I know, it's like, how do you pour a plaster-like substance into this and not have it go everywhere? We just use masking tape to cover up all the holes when we're pouring it. So the other thing that I have here is the anti-bubble spray, which will be something that you will need. Your KN95 mask, because we don't mix investment without protecting our respiratory system. I have a box cutter out just to show you how you could potentially cut down for larger objects, like Sonia's been working on. Some of the larger gating wax that we normally use for bronze casting. You can see here on the little astronaut, it's not the blue wax that is holding him up, but rather this gating wax, because the thickness of this is much more robust than, a little piece of jewelry, right? So the idea is that you want to try to match the sprue size to the thing that you're mounting. I have my Max Wax pen. Some of you have the thread burner. All of the above is okay. This laser point, this needle point, allows us to do the wax welds that are very, very fine when it comes to jewelry. I also have my soldering iron, and the reason why I have that out is because I wanted to show you, if you're working with a brand new flask base, you will need to melt a little bit of wax into the nipple, and I'll show you how that's done. And then the other things on the table is just the sprue wax that you all have been acquainted with, because some of you are building with it, or Sharon is allowing me to use her pendant. You know, she's using it as like this little swirly detail on the necklace pendant, right? Okay, so let's see. I think did you do my reaching that down for me? Thank you. Just want to plug this in and get this heating up. So any questions so far on what I have out?
On that piece, the green background, I mean, only the blues would be in silver, right? Or the whole thing?
The whole thing will be.
Oh, the whole thing will be in silver. Oh.
Yeah, because if we were doing two different metals in this scenario, we would have to cast one element and then solder on the second. We're not going to be able to cast two different metals in a single piece. Yeah. Any others? Okay, so while that's heating up, I just want to point out, and I've already kind of like diagrammed it here on the white piece of paper, but for most of what you all will be spruing, you want to mount your piece typically on a tripod base, so 1, 2, 3 sprues, unless it's a really complex piece, right? So talk to me individually about the best. I'll map it out for you and explain how you want to mount your piece, but most rings are going to be a 3-point mount. The other thing I want you to notice about how this has been mounted is that the ring is not sitting parallel to the flask base. It is on an angle, right? And I'll explain why that is in just a moment. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that my soldering iron is hot. So if you have a brand new flask base, there's no wax in it, so how do you mount the sprues? You're going to fill this little hole with wax, and it doesn't matter which wax it is. It can be the red wax, it can be the brown wax, it can be the jeweler's wax, but we just want to fill it up so that when we're ready to weld the sprues in place, you've got a wax base on which to do that. So while this is filling up, I'll tell you about why we would mount something on a 45-degree angle rather than parallel to the base. And the simple explanation for that is bubbles. So we want to avoid bubbles. And the way that you do that is by mounting on an angle. So I'll draw this out again So let's say you've got your ring. Oh, I don't know if the camera's gonna see that. Let me do it here. So you've got your ring. You've got the sprues. And then you've got the flask base. So when we pour in the investment, we want to evacuate all bubbles. And what can happen, especially if something is flat, is that little bubbles can start to build up, air bubbles, build up on the underside of your object. And even though we're going to vacuum out all of the bubbles, there might be some bubbles that still get stuck. So how do you alleviate that process? Because if you think about something that is fully parallel to your work surface, there's kind of nowhere for the bubble to go, right? But if you tilt it like this one, a little bubble that's building up on the underside like this, you can imagine that if we're trying to vacuum them out, they have a greater chance of escaping if they're kind of able to ride up a slanted surface. Okay. So all of that to say, mount your objects like this so that bubbles can try to escape. All right. So now we've got our nipple on the flask base is filled with wax, so that's ready to go. This one has already been filled with wax, and I wanted to leave this a bit dirty to show you what you shouldn't just go ahead and mount on, right? So there's a little bit of investment in here, and I think this is just like rusty investment, right? So in order to have a pristine surface, I'm just gonna go to the sink, use one of the toothbrushes, and just kind of scrub out the contents so that I'm starting with a clean glass base. So this is the piece that I'm going to be mounting, and you can see that this is a little bit thicker than the average ring that we're carving. So I might say, you know, I would maybe forego the blue sprue wax in this instance, except for maybe if I wanted to do a little insurance spruing to the bale that Sharon has created. So we have some gating wax that could.
Can you put the spaceman there?
Yes, of
Right on the
course.
right side.
So we've got, this is what I call spaghetti, right? And you can see how very flexible it is. So it might seem impossible to support something like this, but remember that this is relatively small and light, and I feel like this is a pretty good match. This is a little bit thinner than Sheridan's pendant, but not by very much. The other option would be like this 1/4 inch gating, but this is kind of overkill, right? So this is much thicker than this, and that's not necessary. But if you wanted to use this, what I would say is that you certainly could. but I would recommend cutting it down. So just using a box cutter.
Make sure when you mount your piece on this base, like that ring right there, it looks like it's about an inch or inch and a quarter off the base. I mean, how close can you get it to the base?
That's a great question, and that was definitely something that I intend to cover. So, I would definitely not go any higher than this. This, in my opinion, is even a little too tall. So I would say the lowest point of your object should be about a ½ an inch above the top of the nipple. Okay. The upper portions of it, of course, will be higher than that. But it's such a small amount of metal that we're casting into these molds that the metal can cool very quickly, right? So if you mount your piece way up here, that means that the silver has to travel all that way before it even gets to your pattern.
Okay.
And you run the risk of it cooling too quickly. So in fact, I have an example of like a very incomplete casting. I mean, this is extreme. But you can see that all that cast here is the pouring cup and a partial sprue, right? So, and this is like a very incomplete casting, but this is for different reasons. This is some of the struggles that I was having with the 3D printed resin wax, and the fact that this ring is extremely thin, like really too thin. Shouldn't have ever been a contender. But I'll pass these around just so that you can see.
So you said an inch between the row and the nose?
½ an inch. ½ an inch between the very top of the nipple to the lowest point of your pattern.
But an inch around and an inch above.
So let me add to this diagram here and say between here and here is ½ inch. Okay.
But it can be more, just not less.
No, you shouldn't do too much taller than that. Yeah, because that's the reason why you might get an incomplete cast is that it's, and conversely, you don't want to be like right on top of the nipple either. So there's a sweet spot. It's all very Goldilocks situation with the lock. No, go ahead.
What happens if it's too short, less than ½ inch?
Too short. I mean, what I have seen, like in a more bronze casting situation, but like that can mean that maybe the bottom portion of your piece doesn't get filled because it's all kind of like gathering at the top of the mold too quickly. Because really what you are creating in this process of a pouring cup and then the sprues and then the pattern is a funnel, right? So the pouring cup, when it gets inverted, is basically a funnel, right? And you'll notice that any funnel that you have in your kitchen, it's got this bit, right? So this is basically the sprue. So when you're pouring the contents in, you want it to fill, you want that pouring cup to fill, because that's pressure and gravity that's helping to push the material through. But if this is too short, it can be kind of a mess, right? So it all kind of goes into this initial chamber before it then goes to, you know, whatever pattern you've created.
So this base here, and you added in, you just showed us you added in, you filled it with that red, or the blue.
The red wax, yeah.
How, is this all wax or is it just like here? I can't visualize that. Because the rim will be on top.
No,
there.
this is just a straight tube in here.
Two.
Yeah,
It doesn't
but
fill
this
up.
becomes your pouring cup. This entire mound becomes your pouring cup. Not that we're filling that entire thing with silver. In actuality, we'll probably
It's just
only
that
like
much.
fill it up to here.
Okay.
You know, when it gets inverted, it'll.
I don't see a hole here. It's to see.
Yeah, I know. You don't need to see the whole. Just like if that's scrambling your brain, this is
Okay.
part like where you just need to kind of trust the process
Okay.
a little bit. Okay. So, any other questions?
Does
Yes.
it make the pouring cup like in the investment when we are at that stage? So
Say
when-
that.
So when you put the investment in the flask,
Yeah.
that's when it would make that shape in the
Yes, yes. So this gets mounted like this, right? We tape it all up, we pour in the investment, and then we remove the flask base. So what you see as a positive space here will then be a negative space in the plaster in the investment. Yeah.
Nature, according to this, we're gonna have stuff that goes over the nipple. So if we gate it, like I'm thinking, because all the gates have to go right in the middle of that
Onto the
tube.
wax surface.
Yeah, just to make sure we're like meticulously in that little circle area to make sure it gets through.
Just, yeah, to make sure that because if you're, it's gonna be harder to get your sprue to stick on the rubber rather than wax, right? So yes, all
All of it has to
sprue
go-
points will converge on that little
Middle.
wax mound.
Okay.
And if you, for some reason, need to go beyond that, just make sure you drip a little bit of wax,
Oh,
you know,
okay.
outside of that. But most of the time, we're all
It's
kind of
all-
coming to that one
It
point.
works, okay.
Yeah.
So in case you are low on silver,
Uh-huh.
which part of it are you risking? The piece itself or the cup?
The cup, for sure. But if you are being very modest with how much silver you're using, like maybe you're a gram short or something like that, yes, I mean, the deficit will most likely be seen in the cup, but just remember that part of the reason why we want the cup to fill is to help push the metal through. Okay. All right, any other questions?
So that spaghetti wax,
Mm-hmm.
if it's so flexible, is it gonna hold your piece up?
It can, yeah.
Is it stiff enough?
Yeah, in fact, what I'll just to prove it to you, I'll use some of this in addition. No, actually, this is all that I was going to use. I'm not even going to use this stuff. So I was just showing you how to cut it down. But I'm going to use the spaghetti, and I'm going to use a little bit of the blue sprue wax just to get the little veil as well. Okay, so for the first two sprues, I like to do them at once. So I'll cut about 1.5 inches and then just fold it so that I get a little V. And just, you don't have to be super, you just want to make sure that like the span of the V is going to fit to your piece, right? But I'm going to go ahead and stick it, sorry, stick it down. And I'm going to do this at a slight bit of an angle. And so we haven't really looked at the anatomy of the Max Wax pen, but this is your on, right? You see when I press the button, it starts to smoke, which tells me that it's hot. So I'm gonna just turn it on, touch it to the wax, and I'm aiming, if here's my V and here's my mound, I'm aiming the wax pen right at that intersection. So those of you who have taken ceramics, remember when you're scoring and slipping and you're joining two pieces together and maybe you're blending the clay a little bit, that's the idea. You're melting this wax to this wax. And it's not sufficient just to do it on one side. I'm gonna do the weld, and you'll see the wax liquefy, and then just leave it. Let it solidify again. Don't push the wax into the wax because that will actually break the bond. Okay, so you're just letting it cool. So if you remember on your list of materials that you could potentially get for this class, one of them is the keyboard duster, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's a quick way to cool your wax if you don't want to wait, right? But don't get impatient with it, because if you try to move things around before the wax cools, you'll break the bond. When we're doing this jewelry micro level stuff, it's usually just enough to like blow on it, right? But I did one weld, and now I'm just gonna go kind of all the way around the base.
What is the advantage of the max wax over just a soldering iron?
This is a pinpoint. This is like just, it's the difference between like cleaning your teeth and like washing your car tire. You know what I mean? Like, this is such micro level stuff. This tiny little pinpoint cannot really be replicated with.
Even this needle nose through the soldering iron too.
Yeah, not really. I mean, is it possible? Yes, but this is so much faster and more precise that it's worth it to work with this instead. Okay, so I went all the way around. I'll show that up close, hopefully, in the camera. And I'll pass this around, but I want to get one more piece on here. So I'm showing you the way that I think is easiest to get these things mounted, but if you switch up the order of things, that's totally okay. You do what works for you, but I like to get the V on first, and then I like to do the third leg of my tripod, but I want to measure, do a little rough measuring here. And in fact, the way that I mount this particular piece, running out of room to draw here. So if I turn it over, I'm gonna put all of my mounts in inconspicuous places. So this is very much the front of the pendant, so I want to mount to the back side. So I feel like this looks like one of the states, I don't know, maybe Tennessee or something. I'm not quite sure. So from the back side, it looks something like this. It's kind of an irregular rectangle. So I'm gonna put one sprue at this bottom corner, another over here, and then maybe one more over here, and then I'll do like one for the bail, okay? And because I want to go to this lower corner, I think I want to make that the lowest point. So I'm just going to trim. A little bit away to shorten one of those, so that now I have this, and this is my lowest point.
Did you measure that, that wax to be a half an inch before you covered it over?
Inch and a half.
Inch and a
Eyeball.
half?
She said so.
To make the V?
Yeah.
It was about an inch and a half.
Inch and a half.
So before I attach this third sprue, I just want to kind of mock things up and make sure that things are going to land in the right place. That looks pretty good. So once again, using my tool here, I'm going to start welding, excuse me. Okay, I did a few little tack welds, so now I can let go. Just realized I did this on the wrong flask base. Okay.
Why? What does that mean?
Well, I don't need this huge
Oh,
flask.
it's too big.
Yeah, so that's okay. I'll do it again. I'll pass this around while I quickly do the other. So have a look at that and see if you can identify the fact that I went all the way around the base of those. And so now that I know that I want the lowest point on Tennessee to be my low point, when I make my next V, I'm gonna make it irregular, right? So I'm gonna make one arm of the V a little bit shorter than the other.
A little bit of extra wet wax around the base, where it's over the hump.
Yep.
Would you clean that off before you do the investment?
No.
It's not that much to be concerned with.
Correct. So one thing that I will point out to you all that will likely happen, especially if this is your first time spruing anything, is that as you're wax welding things in place, you may undercut the sprue a little bit. So if this is the normal width of your sprue, when you go to wax weld things, it might eat away some of that wax. So you can see this is a little bit undercut right here. You do want to avoid that. Okay, so what you can do to kind of backfill is just take a tiny little glob of wax. And those of you who did metal sculpture with me before, this will seem familiar. But I'm just gonna melt that into place to make up for that undercut. And what that does is I've melted that wax blob so that now I've filled in that little undercut. Okay. So Johan, because you've never done this process before, I want you and Kimmy both to really be paying attention to this, please, so that I don't have to repeat it again. Okay, so I've got the first two on. I'm mocking it up just to make sure that everything's gonna work out the way I've placed it. And I'm gonna take a little bit more wax for my third leg of the tripod. And again, I'm just going to make sure that at the very least it's not too short. Okay, so I've mocked it up. I'm on at least a 45. I could honestly, well, actually that's not a bad. So not only is this on a 45, but I'm also tilting this way. And again, this is all just to kind of ensure that bubbles don't get trapped. So I'm adding my third leg. And I'm going all the way around.
If you made your one leg too short, you cut it off and just...
Yeah, I would, rather than trying to like
Right.
add a little bit more. Okay, so now this is kind of the tricky part. And another thing that you can do to kind of help all of this go a little bit easier is that when you cut or pinch the end of the sprue, it might be on an angle, right? So then if I'm trying to mount my piece on top of this, you see I have this deficit. So maybe just pinch it so that it's at the same angle so that you can then just get a weld all the way around. So this one is a little funky. So I'm just using a fingernail to make the top of it more conducive to the welds that I want to do.
So those are much longer sprues than the half-inch you were previously talking about.
The bottom one is not though. It's really about, like this is my shortest one.
Okay.
Okay, the top, if you're angling things properly, the ones towards the top will be longer than half an inch, but that part is okay. All right, and this is where you might want to kind of jig things, right? So just so that I can not fight with being able to see with what I'm doing. It's going to be easier if I tilt the base so that I can see where I want to weld. So just 2 little tack welds, and now I can kind of pick this whole thing up. And then I can do more. So just another case in point of like, why do I prefer this tool over a soldering iron? You see kind of all the weird little angles and nooks and crannies that I need to get into. That'd be a lot harder with a fat soldering iron. So I just picked up a tiny little crumb of red wax to kind of melt into that deficit. And I'll do the same thing one more time. Oops. So y'all can see what I've got so far. I will pass it around one more time, but I want to talk about, you know, this detail and the bail. That's one more piece that I want to really make sure that that fills, right? So I'm going to take a little bit of the spruing wax. And here's a little trick. You don't necessarily always have to come back down to the base. You could go from the sprue up to here. So a little shortcut. But you want to, if you're gonna do something like that, you want to make sure that you're really steering clear of the pattern, right? We don't want to do something where you're like right up against the pattern and you don't allow enough negative space for the investment to fill. So I've made this kind of like a D curve, right? So that I can attach but not get in the way of the pattern. Oops. I blew a little too hard.
Just hold it up so it doesn't bend backwards or something when you're filling?
No, I mean, you can use sprues in that manner, and we do it a lot, especially when we get to doing sculptural bronze, because sometimes the wax is heavy enough that we just need extra gates to like support it, right? But usually when we're doing jewelry, that's not necessarily the case. I just want to make sure that the silver fills in this bail. So I'm just tacking on a sprue that goes directly to the bail.
Because the middle follows the sprues.
Yes, yes, precisely. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna pass this around. Please look at it, photograph it. And in the meantime, I will start preparing the flask itself. So please use the like painter's tape, not the masking tape, okay? The masking tape, the tan tape, it just sticks a little too much, and it's a pain in the butt to clean off. So you're going to use the painter's tape and mask off all the holes. And then while that's going around, I just want to point out to you this chart over here on the far wall. So this is your investment chart. And it allows you to figure out how much investment you will need to mix up. So the left-hand column, it says flask diameter. So I used to just have 2 flask sizes, but now I've got 4 flask sizes. So you will definitely want to measure your flask before you decide how much investment you need. So the flask diameter is going to be, for this particular one, is 3 1/4, and the flask height is 4. So 3 1/4 by 4. So I'm gonna look at 3 1/4. I don't quite have that. I have 3 1/2, so let's go with that. 3 1/2 by 4. So that means I need 1 pound, 15 ounces of investment material to 334 milliliters of water. Okay, I know this is where like math starts to creep into art, and it's really important to understand these measurements, right? Because mixing a bad batch of investment can mean that your piece doesn't cast well or at all. So if you have any questions about it, let me know. But I want you to attempt to figure out the math on your own first. So measure your flask. You can go, I would say, be a little bit generous rather than shortchanging yourself. So this investment chart doesn't have 3 1/4, so we're just gonna go 3 1/2 by 4. And so that means 1 pound, 15 ounces of investment, 334 milliliters of water. Now, if you're lucky enough to have chosen one of the original flasks, so this is the very smallest. This is a medium. Is it exactly the same as this one? This is more like, this is slightly wider. So this is it's almost negligible, honestly. Actually, 3 1/4 by 4. Okay, so our medium-sized flasks are pretty much the same size. So you're lucky because this little pink piece of paper here has your calculations for you. Okay, so if you're using a small flask, you need 12 ounces of investment and 175 milliliters of water. Okay. But if you're venturing into the large flask territory, then that's going to be a little bit of math on your own that you are then more than welcome to double check with me. So while that piece is still going around, let me point out that the investment is here in this rolly cart. Notice that it says on top of the box, stop, wear a mask, right? So I do not want you mixing investment unless you are wearing a KN95 mask. If you do not have one, I will get you one. Water you're just gonna get from the sink. Just make sure that it's as cool as possible, right? So you know that our cold tap water sometimes isn't even cold. It's like on hotter days, it's verges on the side of warm. And then around the corner, you will find in the far cabinet graduated mixing containers. So how do you know that you're getting, what did I say? 12 ounces of investment and 175 milliliters of water? You want to use a container like this. So milliliter, this has a bunch of different measurements on here for you. So milliliters are here, ounces are here. So 12 ounces of investment to 175 milliliters of water, right? So that's, those of you who have mixed plaster a lot, you know that I always say it's approximately 1-to-1. With investment, it is wildly different. And like you will start to mix the two and think like, oh my God, I don't have nearly enough water, but just trust these calculations, especially the small and medium. I've done it, you know, many times over, and I know that like if you're careful about your measuring, that is sufficient. Don't use the same container to retrieve your water as to retrieve your investment. You want to keep the materials separate until you actually mix them. And just like plaster, you always pour the powder into the water and not the other way around. It's really critical. Write that down. Okay. You all powder into water and never the reverse. Because if you do the reverse, you just end up with a cake and like you'll never be able to mix it. Okay. All right, so do I have this piece back now? Okay. All right, so my last task before I start to mix my investment is to spray the debubbler on my pattern. And it's really important that you kind of like have this checklist of everything that you need to do before you start mixing the investment, because once you start mixing the investment, it's not like you can hit a pause button. There's a chemical reaction that happens and it'll set whether you're ready or not. So this is not a cure-all, right? You don't want to count on the debubbler doing everything for you. A lot of whether or not you get bubbles in your piece depends on how you've mounted it. But, you know, I have it on a 45-degree angle, and even this is not totally flat. It's kind of tilted this way. But spray some debubbler all the way around.
Is that just kind of liquid dish soap or something?
It's it's more like alcohol, like you can probably even
Okay.
smell the alcohol,
Did you get underneath as well?
underneath as well, yep. Doesn't tell me what it is. It just says it's extremely flammable.
That's always fun to read.
Yeah. And may cause eye irritation, so don't spray it into your eye.
Oh, okay. How do you spell that?
Okay, so I'm gonna do my checklist one more time. I've sprayed debubbler, I've weighed my wax, I've taped up my flask, and I know my measurements of how much investment and water I need, okay? So I think what I'll do is pause the video for the moment so that I can set it up so that it's pointed at the